Mark Henderson had always been a by-the-book homeowner in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maple Grove. His above-ground pool had been a staple of his backyard for years, a source of summer fun for his two children. However, recent changes in the neighborhood association's regulations and the pool's deteriorating condition had pushed Mark to make a difficult decision. The pool was a relic of better times, installed 15 years ago when Mark and his wife, Elena, first moved into the modest two-story craftsman-style home. Back then, it had been a symbol of their success. A young couple with two small children, navigating the challenges of parenthood and professional life. Mark, a 42-year-old software engineer at a local tech startup, and Elena, a pediatric nurse, had saved for years to afford this slice of suburban paradise. When they first bought the pool, it was a gleaming azure rectangle that dominated the backyard. Weekend barbecues, birthday parties, and lazy summer afternoons had transformed the pool into more than just a recreational feature. It was the heart of their family memories. Their children, Sophie, now 14, and Alex, 11, had learned to swim in its waters, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood on countless summer days. But time and neglect had taken their toll. The pool liner had developed multiple tears, requiring constant patching. The metal frame showed significant rust, particularly along the edges where water and chemicals had slowly eaten away at the structural integrity. Mark had become increasingly concerned about safety. What was once a source of joy was now a potential hazard. The neighborhood had changed too. When they first moved in, Maple Grove was a tight-knit community of young families. Now it had transformed into a more regulated, image-conscious suburb. The Homeowners Association had become increasingly strict, implementing new guidelines that seemed to prioritize aesthetic uniformity over individual expression. Mark had consulted multiple pool maintenance professionals over the past year. Each assessment brought more bad news. Repairing the pool would cost nearly as much as installing a new one, and even then, they couldn't guarantee its long-term structural integrity. Elena had been the first to suggest removal. It's becoming more of a liability than a luxury, she had said during a late-night discussion, her nursing background making her particularly attuned to potential risks. Financial considerations played a significant role too. Mark's startup had faced recent challenges, and unexpected expenses were the last thing they needed. The annual maintenance, water treatment, and potential repair costs for the aging pool were becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Sophie and Alex were also growing older, their interests shifting from pool parties to more teenage pursuits like soccer, band practice, and video games. The final decision came after a particularly harsh winter. When spring arrived, Mark discovered significant damage to the pool's structure. Cracks had formed, the liner was deteriorating more rapidly, and the cost of comprehensive repairs would be astronomical. It was time to say goodbye to the family pool. Obtaining the necessary permits had been a meticulous process. Mark, true to his professional nature, had researched local regulations, consulted with the city's building department, and carefully planned every step of the pool removal. He wanted to ensure the process was not just legal, but also environmentally responsible and minimally disruptive to the neighborhood. After careful consideration and consulting with local contractors, Mark began the process of removing the aging pool. He meticulously planned the demolition, ensuring minimal disruption to the surrounding landscape. Little did he know that his seemingly routine home improvement project would soon become the talk of the neighborhood. The first step was hiring Miller & Sons Construction, a local company with a reputation for careful and environmentally conscious demolition work. Jake Miller, the owner, had walked Mark through every detail of the pool removal process during their initial consultation. "We'll do this right," Jake had assured him, spreading out carefully drawn plans on Mark's kitchen table. Early on a crisp Monday morning, the construction team arrived with an impressive array of equipment. A large excavator stood ready at the edge of the backyard, its metal arm poised like a prehistoric creature about to begin its work. Mark had taken the week off from work, partly to oversee the project and partly to manage the inevitable disruption to his family's routine. The removal process was more complex than most people realize. It wasn't simply a matter of breaking up the pool and hauling it away. First, the team had to drain the pool completely, a process that took nearly 2 full days. They used specialized pumps to redirect the water safely, ensuring it wouldn't flood neighboring properties or violate local environmental regulations. Sophie and Alex watched with a mixture of fascination and melancholy as the pool, a backdrop to so many of their childhood memories, began to disappear. Mark caught his daughter taking photos, capturing the deconstruction process. "It's the end of an era," Sophie had commented, her teenage stoicism barely concealing a hint of nostalgia. The demolition itself was a carefully orchestrated process. Jake's team started by removing the pool liner, carefully cutting and rolling it for proper disposal. The metal frame came next, with workers using cutting torches and heavy machinery to dismantle the structure piece by piece. Mark had insisted on recycling as much material as possible, a decision that aligned with his environmental principles. Beneath the pool, the team discovered several challenges. Years of water and chemical exposure had created a unique ecosystem in the ground. The soil needed careful treatment, with Jake recommending a specialized soil remediation process to neutralize any chemical residues and prepare the area for future landscaping. Mark had already consulted with the local landscape designer, Elena, helping him choose native plants that would transform the former pool area into a beautiful garden. They were planning a mix of perennial flowers, ornamental grasses, and a small seating area, a peaceful replacement for the once bustling pool space. The noise and activity attracted considerable attention from neighbors. Most watched with mild curiosity, but Mark could see Karen Miller periodically peeking over the fence, her critical gaze sweeping over every aspect of the demolition. He tried to ignore her, focusing instead on the methodical work of Jake and his team. By Wednesday, the pool's physical structure was completely gone. What remained was a large, somewhat uneven patch of ground, a blank canvas waiting to be transformed. Mark felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at addressing a long-standing maintenance issue, nostalgia for the memories created in and around the pool, and excitement about the future landscaping project. Little did he know that Karen Miller was already formulating a plan, her mind racing with potential objections and complaints. The pool removal was about to become much more than a simple home improvement project. Karen Miller, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, first caught wind of Mark's pool removal. Known for her strict adherence to unwritten neighborhood rules and her penchant for dramatic confrontations, she immediately saw an opportunity to assert her perceived authority. At 58, Karen had been a fixture in Maple Grove for over 2 decades. A retired high school administrative assistant, she had transformed her post-career life into a self-assigned role of neighborhood monitor. Her modest ranch-style home, located 3 doors down from the Hendersons, was immaculate, a testament to her obsessive attention to detail and control. Karen's reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered about her legendary complaints to the Homeowners Association, her meticulously documented infractions of neighborhood guidelines, and her uncanny ability to spot the slightest deviation from what she considered acceptable suburban standards. She maintained a comprehensive 3-ring binder that contained everything from satellite images of neighborhood properties to carefully annotated lists of potential violations. The pool removal had first come to her attention through her extensive neighborhood surveillance network. Every morning, Karen would sit by her bay window, binoculars at the ready, tracking the comings and goings of her neighbors. She had a particular interest in the Hendersons, whom she viewed as increasingly problematic residents who showed little respect for what she considered the established order of Maple Grove. Mark's pool had long been a source of quiet irritation for Karen. Over the years, she had documented numerous perceived infractions, occasional overflow during pool parties, music that she felt was too loud, and what she considered improper pool maintenance. Her previous attempts to raise concerns had been largely ignored by both the Hendersons and the Homeowners Association. This pool removal presented a perfect opportunity. Karen began her investigation methodically, just as she had done countless times before. She pulled out her official-looking clipboard, retrieved her neighborhood association bylaws, and started cross-referencing every possible regulation that might give her leverage. Her first stop was the city building permit office. Armed with her meticulously prepared folder, she began asking pointed questions about Mark's pool removal. The city clerk, well familiar with Karen's frequent visits, tried to remain patient. She explained that Mark had obtained all necessary permits and followed proper procedures, but Karen was not easily deterred. Years of frustration seemed to converge on this single issue. Karen saw herself as the last line of defense against what she perceived as neighborhood decay. To her, Mark's pool removal was symptomatic of a larger problem: residents who did whatever they wanted without considering the broader community impact. Her husband, Robert, had long since learned to stay out of her crusades. A retired accountant who preferred golf and quiet evenings, he would quietly retreat to his home office whenever Karen began one of her neighborhood improvement missions. He loved her determination, but had learned that arguing was futile. As the day progressed, Karen began making phone calls. She contacted other longtime residents, shared her concerns, and slowly began to build what she believed was a case against Mark's pool removal. In her mind, she was protecting the neighborhood's best interests, maintaining property values, and upholding a standard of living that had defined Maple Grove for decades. Little did she know that her efforts were about to take an unexpected turn, transforming a simple home improvement project into a neighborhood drama that would be discussed for years to come. One sunny afternoon, Karen marched up to Mark's property line, her face red with indignation. She claimed the pool removal was violating some obscure neighborhood covenant and threatened legal action. Mark, calm and collected, showed her the proper permits and documentation, but Karen was not easily deterred. The confrontation began on a Thursday just as Jake Miller's construction team was preparing to finish the final grading of the former pool area. Mark was outside discussing landscaping plans with Jake when Karen appeared, her approach reminiscent of a military strategist advancing on enemy territory. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen's voice carried across the yard, causing Sophie to peek out the living room window. "You cannot just destroy a major property feature without proper consultation." She clutched a thick folder of papers, which Mark recognized as her infamous neighborhood documentation binder. Mark took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. He had dealt with Karen's previous complaints over the years and knew that escalation would only make the situation worse. "Good afternoon, Karen," he said evenly, turning to face her. "Is there something specific concerns you about the pool removal?" Jake Miller stepped back, recognizing the potential for a heated exchange. He'd seen neighborhood disputes before and knew it was best to let Mark handle the situation while remaining nearby in case things became contentious. Karen began rattling off a series of increasingly convoluted arguments. She claimed the pool removal would negatively impact property values, violated some obscure homeowners association bylaw from 2007, and potentially created environmental hazards. Her arguments jumped from one point to another, a verbal shotgun approach designed to overwhelm rather than provide substantive critique. "I have all the necessary permits," Mark repeated calmly, pulling out the official documentation from his back pocket. He had anticipated potential challenges and made sure to keep everything in order. The city has approved the removal and we're following all environmental guidelines. But Karen was not interested in documentation. She launched into a detailed critique of the pool's previous condition, claiming it had been an eyesore for years. "Your pool has been a disgrace to the neighborhood for a decade," she declared, her voice rising. "And now you're just going to destroy the entire backyard?" Mark couldn't help but notice the irony. Karen had complained about the pool for years, and now she was upset about its removal. "We're actually planning to create a native plant garden," he explained, trying to find common ground. "It should improve the overall look of the property." The conversation was drawing attention. Neighbors began to peek out of their windows, some familiar with Karen's frequent confrontations. A few had even pulled out their phones, sensing this might become another neighborhood spectacle. Sophie, watching from inside, sent a quick text to her mother at work. "Mom, Karen's having a meltdown in our yard again," a message read, accompanied by a rolling eyes emoji. Jake Miller, sensing the tension, subtly positioned himself closer to Mark. He'd seen neighborhood disputes escalate quickly and wanted to ensure things didn't get out of hand. The construction equipment around them seemed to add an extra layer of tension to the confrontation. "I'll be contacting the homeowners association," Karen declared, her final statement more of a threat than a promise. "This is not over, Mark Henderson." As she turned to march away, Mark exchanged a knowing look with Jake. The pool removal was complete, but the real drama was just beginning. Undeterred by Mark's documentation, Karen contacted the local police, spinning an elaborate tale of property destruction and potential environmental hazards. She painted Mark as a reckless homeowner who was destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic and potentially causing significant damage. The Maple Grove Police Department was no stranger to Karen Miller's calls. Officer David Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran of the force, recognized her name immediately when the dispatch came through. He'd responded to her complaints multiple times over the years, everything from alleged noise violations to suspicions about suspicious landscaping choices. Karen's call to the non-emergency line was a masterpiece of dramatization. "I need to report a serious environmental violation," she began, her voice trembling with what she hoped sounded like genuine concern. The desk sergeant listened patiently, years of experience teaching him to filter out the hyperbole. "Ma'am, can you be more specific?" Sergeant Mark Thompson asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He knew Karen from previous interactions. A persistent citizen who genuinely believed she was protecting the neighborhood, even if her methods were somewhat excessive. Karen launched into a detailed narrative that would have been impressive if it weren't so fabricated. She described the pool removal as an environmental catastrophe, suggesting that Mark was improperly disposing of chemicals, potentially contaminating the groundwater. She emphasized the lack of proper environmental oversight, her voice rising with each syllable. The police department had a protocol for such complaints. Officer Rodriguez was assigned to investigate, knowing full well that these calls often amounted to nothing more than neighborhood drama. He pulled up Mark Henderson's file, a clean record with no previous complaints, a stark contrast to Karen Miller's extensive interaction history with local authorities. At the police station, the interactions were carefully documented. Sergeant Thompson made notes, his experienced eye catching the inconsistencies in Karen's story. Years of handling neighborhood disputes had honed his ability to distinguish between genuine concerns and personal vendettas. Rodriguez prepared his report, gathering the necessary documentation. He contacted the city building department, confirmed Mark's permits, and reviewed the environmental guidelines for pool removal. Everything appeared to be in perfect order. Karen's husband, Robert, had long since learned to stay out of these situations. When she returned home from filing the report, he was seated in his favorite armchair, reading the local newspaper. "I've done what's necessary to protect the neighborhood," Karen declared, more of herself than to her husband. The irony was not lost on the local police. Karen had a reputation for being overzealous, yet she genuinely believed she was performing a public service. Her file was thick with reports, most of which had been dismissed or found to be without merit. As Officer Rodriguez prepared to visit the Henderson property, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Another day in Maple Grove, another neighborhood dispute that was more comedy than crime. He gathered his clipboard, checked his equipment, and headed out to investigate yet another of Karen Miller's complaints. Little did Karen know that her elaborate attempt to create trouble for Mark was about to backfire spectacularly. The wheels of bureaucracy and justice were already in motion, and the truth was far simpler than the elaborate narrative she had constructed. When the police arrived, they were prepared for a serious complaint. However, their investigation quickly revealed the truth. Mark had followed every legal procedure, obtained all necessary permits, and was conducting the pool removal with professional precision. Officer David Rodriguez pulled up to the Henderson property just after 2 p.m., his patrol car casting a long shadow across the recently excavated backyard. He approached Mark with a professional demeanor, clipboard in hand, expecting another routine neighborhood dispute. "Mr. Henderson," Rodriguez began, "we've received a complaint about your pool removal project." His tone was neutral, years of experience teaching him to approach such situations without prejudgment. Mark was calm and cooperative, immediately inviting the officer to inspect the site. He had anticipated potential questions and had prepared a comprehensive folder of documentation. Jake Miller from the construction company was still on site, ready to provide technical details about the removal process. The investigation was methodical. Rodriguez first reviewed the city permits, carefully examining each document. Jake Miller walked him through the entire process, explaining the environmental considerations they had taken into account. They showed how they were handling soil remediation, ensuring minimal environmental impact. "We've been particularly careful about chemical disposal," Jake explained, showing the officers specialized containers used for any potential chemical residues from the pool. "We're following all EPA guidelines for pool removal and soil treatment." Mark pulled out additional documentation, soil testing reports, waste disposal certificates, and detailed plans for the future landscaping. Each document was meticulously organized, a testament to his professional approach to home improvement. Officer Rodriguez couldn't help but be impressed. What Karen had portrayed as an environmental disaster was actually a carefully planned and executed home improvement project. He took photographs of the site, noting the professional manner in which the pool removal was being conducted. The neighborhood added an interesting backdrop to the investigation. A few curious neighbors had gathered at their fences, watching the proceedings. Rodriguez could see the tension in their expressions, some sympathetic to Mark, others clearly aligned with Karen's perspective. Sophie Henderson watched from the living room window, texting her mother updates. "Police are here. Dad's being totally calm. Jake's explaining everything," her message read. As the investigation progressed, Rodriguez began to piece together the real story. The contrast between Karen's dramatic complaint and the actual situation was stark. He interviewed Mark, Jake, and even took a statement from a neighboring homeowner who had been present during part of the pool removal. The technical details were thorough. The removal process had been conducted over several days with careful attention to environmental regulations. Soil samples had been taken, potential contamination risks had been assessed, and all necessary precautions had been implemented. "Mr. Henderson," Rodriguez said finally, closing his notebook, "everything appears to be in order. The complaint seems to be without merit." Mark appreciated the officer's professionalism. "I understand the importance of following proper procedures," he responded. "We wanted to ensure everything was done correctly." As Rodriguez prepared to leave, he couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Another day of separating fact from fiction in suburban Maple Grove. The pool was gone, the ground was being prepared for new landscaping, and another of Karen Miller's complaints had been thoroughly debunked. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of the neighborhood drama.